The challenges announced in the center of the galaxy, where stars burned brighter and time flowed slower. The Great Council gathered once more inside the glass hall that floated above a sea of energy. The oldest minds of the known universe had arrived from every system, every quadrant, and every region that had seen war, peace, or silence. They came together for one reason: to begin the trial again. The Endurance Protocol was not a simple game. It was the oldest challenge of existence, the purest test of strength, thought, pain, and will designed by an ancient extinct race. It was meant to reveal which species held the potential to lead the galaxy, not by power alone, but by survival in the face of the unknown. Every few cycles the protocol reopened, and once more the announcement echoed across the stars. This time over 300 species submitted their names for the challenge. Some were known for their brilliance in science. Others were famous for their control over gravity, fields, and time folds. A few had claws that could cut through metal, or minds that could bend thought itself. They arrived in ships shaped like serpents or towers or waves, all ready to prove themselves. Before the council, among these giants, stood a small group in black suits. Their ship had dents on the outside, scorch marks that had never been cleaned, and a flag with a blue sphere behind. White clouds they stood without movement, no glow in their skin, no wings, no shifting eyes, only flesh bones. A gaze that stared ahead. The crowd around them barely paid attention. Some laughed, some whispered. One voice said they won't last an hour. They were called Deathworlders, galactic terms that meant humans came from a world too violent to live. Volcanoes, storms, beasts, diseases, all mixed on one spinning ball, and yet they survived, grew, thrived, spread. They were not the strongest, not the fastest, not the smartest, but they endured when no one expected them to do so. The council allowed them to join the challenge without much hope. They expected a quick end for the humans. One elder from the crystal race said it would be merciful to let them go now, but the Deathworlders refused. They signed with calm hands and said one sentence with no emotion: "We came to finish what others fear to start." The first phase of the challenge was set. It would begin on the Edge Station, an artificial ring on the very edge of dark space. It floated near the gravity well of a collapsed star. In that zone, logic bent and physics stuttered. The test would involve mental control under conditions that twisted perception. A being would face illusions, pressure shifting codes, and sounds meant to break focus. The top species sent their champions, minds trained from birth with the ability to store entire books in a second. Others relied on neural links or hive guidance. Yet the Deathworlders walked in without external tools, only basic suits with oxygen and internal heat. Observers watched from above through the crystal screen. The test began. Signals fed into the brains of all participants. Walls turned into oceans. Floors cracked open into memory halls. Voices of lost ones cried or shouted or begged. None of it was real, yet it felt real enough to freeze thought. Some beings screamed and collapsed within minutes. Others began to speak to voices that did not exist. A few tried to escape through walls that were not there, but the Deathworlders stayed seated, hands on their knees, eyes half-closed, hearts beating at normal pace. They did not react as others did. They ignored the voices, ignored the false past, ignored the pain. They simply focused on one thing: breathing in, breathing out, counting each second, not solving the challenge like a code, but surviving it like a storm. The timer reached 2 hours, and over half the species had failed. The system started removing those who no longer moved or whose minds had broken. When the chamber doors opened, only a handful of beings still remained, and among them stood all 6 Deathworlders. Silent, steady, alert. Whispers began to rise again. This time not laughter, but confusion they didn't even try to decode. One voice said they did nothing, said another, but they survived, said a third voice, and that made them different. The council met again, reviewed results, compared mental stability, read brainwave data, and had no choice but to pass the Deathworlders into the next round, while marking their method as unorthodox, still effective when asked to speak about their experience. The human leader replied with no smile and no pride: "We live with chaos every day. That test was easier than walking home in a thunderstorm back on Earth." Silence in the hall that followed carried more weight than a scream. Species that once ignored the humans now began to study them not out of respect, but out of curiosity. How did they survive? What made them last when others fell? The next challenge would not be about the mind, it would be something far more painful. And it would change the view of Deathworlders forever. But for now the black suits walked out of the test chamber, without words, without cheers, and without a single moment of doubt in their step. They came from a world that wanted them dead since the moment they were born, and yet they lived. That was the only truth that mattered. The council updated the board. 32 species passed the first trial, and 6 of them were Deathworlders. The message went out across the galaxy, and those who once laughed now watched with quiet eyes. Challenge had just begun, and already the rules were bending around. The ones no one had expected to survive the trials begin. The next phase of the challenge arrived without warning. The council did not give time for recovery or rest. No sleep chambers, no comfort, just a shift in air pressure and a silent signal. The remaining species were moved to a cold space, carved into the side of a dead planet. The light here was dim, the gravity weaker, and the silence sharp enough to sting the ears. This test was not for the mind, it was for the body and spirit. A chamber that pulled pain from memory and turned it into physical weight. It fed on fear, on guilt, on sorrow, and reflected it back through pulses and flashes. The chamber shaped itself based on the soul of the one who entered. No 2 trials looked the same, and there was no way to prepare for it. The creatures who entered first came from species known for physical toughness, their muscles hardened through centuries of evolution, claws like blades, skin like armor. They laughed as they stepped forward, sure of their success. They believed they could survive anything inside the chamber. Their screams echoed out into the stone halls. They did not return with pride or victory. Some crawled out breathing heavy, some cried and covered their faces. Others begged to leave the trial altogether. Council began to mark names off the list one by one. Hope faded for many. Some tried to fake strength, but the chamber could not be tricked. It knew who they were inside. It knew what they feared most, and it brought it all forward. Then it was the turn of the Deathworlder. She walked in without comment. No speeches, no warm-up, no armor, except their own bodies. They entered one by one. The door closed behind them and silence returned inside the chamber. The lights shifted, the temperature dropped, then rose, then dropped again. Walls began to move, sound began to distort, memories played on the surfaces of the room, but they were not peaceful memories. They were full of smoke, fire, loss, pain, betrayal. Faces long gone, voices long buried, all returned. One man inside saw the final minutes of his childhood when his house burned with his brother still inside. He reached forward, but the flames never allowed him through. His hands shook, but he did not fall. Another woman watched herself on a battlefield surrounded by broken teammates. Her own leg missing, her vision blurred, yet she kept crawling, kept reaching for one last comrade who still moved. Her scream echoed across the false valley, but no one came for her. No one came then, and no one came now. They felt the pain again. Not just with the mind, but through the nerves, through the bones. But they did not run. They did not try to break out. They faced it every second, every image, every cut that opened without reason, every sound that reminded them of failure. They stood inside the storm of memory and did not fall outside. The observers noticed something unusual. Their heartbeat stayed steady. Their breathing followed a controlled rhythm. The pain was real, but the response was trained not by machines or programs, but by life itself. Council members leaned forward, their crystal eyes scanning the data for tricks, but found none. The humans had no shields, no mental blockers, nothing artificial. Just experience, hard-earned and well-hidden. None of the guards, watching from above, whispered something that passed through the room like a chill. If this is what they face inside their own minds, what kind of world raised them? Chamber doors opened again, and the Deathworlders stepped out, not limping, not crawling, but standing tall, their faces pale, their eyes quiet, not proud. Just aware. They did not ask for results or praise. They simply moved to the next marker and waited. Species that once ignored them now moved away. When they passed, some looked with fear, others with awe, but none with disrespect. The trial continued. More species entered, more species fell. The chamber showed no mercy and gave no second chances. When the phase ended, only 17 species remained from the original 300 of those 17, the Deathworlders remained untouched. Their scores placed them at the top, not because they were the fastest or strongest, but because they endured what others could not even face. The council held a closed meeting after the trial records were open. Comparisons drawn. Experts argued how humans survived such deep trauma without breaking. Many offered theories, few offered answers. Some said it was madness, others called it evolution. Some believed they no longer feared death, and that made them immune to despair. But the truth was simpler than all the theories. The Deathworlders accepted pain as part of life. They did not run from it. They did not try to erase it. They carried it like a tool, like a memory that made them stronger. When asked later why they did not scream inside the chamber, one of the humans replied with no emotion, because screaming does not help, and we learned that a long time ago. That answer was recorded and replayed across hundreds of systems. Scholars tried to understand the tone, the meaning behind the words, but they could not recreate the life that formed such thinking. The next phase of the challenge would not be about mind or body, but something deeper, something that tested choice and belief and the ability to act in the darkest of moments. Many believed that even the Deathworlders would fall in that round. The humans simply waited near the edge of the hall, eyes forward, breath calm, standing like shadows cast by a fire that never died. The test of morality was coming, and it would show the truth behind every species, not through words or skills, but through decisions that left marks no test could erase. Deathworlders remained silent, ready, not because they believed they would win, but because they knew what it meant to lose and still continue. Pain, isolation, and fire. The cold moon where the third trial was held had no name, no sky, no wind, only a broken land full of cracks and silence. The ground was dry, the air thin, and the sun never rose above the rocks. Long shadows stretched across the surface, and nothing moved except the machines placed there by the council. This trial was different from the ones before. It was not about solving problems or holding pain. It was not about memory or fear or tricks. It was about time and isolation. The kind of silence that eats away at thoughts. The kind of waiting that makes strong minds fall apart. Each being would be placed alone in a deep hole carved into the rock. No light, no sound, no smell. Only space and time. No food, no way to tell how long they had stayed. No voice to speak to, no face to see. Only the sound of their own breath and the beating of their heart. Test was not about how long they could survive. It was about how long they could stay whole. The first to enter were creatures from a cold water world known for their discipline and order. Their minds trained for stillness. They lasted for hours, but when they returned, their eyes were unfocused. Some whispered strange things. Others begged to go home. One even tried to claw at his own skin, as if something had followed him from the hole. Another group, known for their hive link, broke down within minutes without the voice of the collective. Their thoughts scattered and turned against them. They came back, shaking. Some refused to speak. Others refused to move. One by one, the best minds in the galaxy stepped forward with pride and came back with silence, fear, or madness. Some cried without knowing why. Others forgot their own names. Then came the Deathworlder. She did not ask questions, did not change expression, did not carry tools or requests. They walked into the deep hole with calm steps, their hands open, their backs straight, their eyes not looking at the watchers or the sky or the stone, just forward inside the hole. The darkness was complete. Sound vanished. Nothing touched them. Not wind, not heat, not light. Even their own body began to feel distant, as if it no longer belonged to them. The brain began to drift, searching for something to hold on to, but there was nothing. Not even memory wanted to stay in such a place. Other beings felt the same silence and fell into it, but the humans treated it differently. They spoke to themselves, not loud, just enough to stay aware. They sang songs from forgotten times, old and broken and full of warmth. They counted, they made stories in their heads. They gave names to the dark walls, They laughed not because it was funny, but because it reminded them of being alive. Some sat still, others moved in slow circles, some closed their eyes and dreamed of places where fire burned and water fell, where wind touched skin and voices called out their name. They held on to the idea of life with a grip stronger than gravity. Time passed in silence, but inside the holes life did not stop for the Deathworlders. It burned small and steady like a match in a frozen cave. When they returned, they were pale but stable, not wild, not broken, not confused. They stood straight, looked the council in the eye, and said nothing because there was nothing to say. Their silence was not from fear, it was from strength. Other species saw them return and stepped back. Some bowed their heads, not in respect, but in something deeper, something harder to name, something close to the feeling of being small. The council reviewed the trial results. The Deathworlders had the highest mental stability, the cleanest record of thought, the strongest response to long isolation. They showed no hallucination, no loss of name or self or time when asked how they endured the whole. One of them said, "We were born into a world where silence sometimes means death, where waiting is not peace but danger, where every second without a sound might be the second before the worst thing happens. So we learned to stay awake inside the quiet." That answer spread across communication lines from system to system. It reached planets that had never heard of Earth. It made scholars pause. It made leaders sit in silence. It made enemies wonder. Only 11 species remained after the third trial, and the Deathworlders were still among them. Untouched, unshaken, unchanged. The next trial would test more than pain, more than time, more than thought. It would test the soul, the ability to make a choice that hurts, the ability to lose without hate, the ability to protect without reason. Council prepared the final chamber while the survivors rested, or tried to sleep, or sat in deep thought. But the humans did not rest. They stood near the edge of the platform, looking at the stars, not in awe, not in fear, just watching. They did not ask what the final challenge would be. They did not guess or plan. They waited the same way one waits for rain or fire, not with dread, but with readiness. They came from a place where peace was rare and silence was never safe, and still they learned how to live, how to grow, how to laugh and cry and build again. Did not come to prove they were better. They came because something in them wanted to see how far they could go, how much they could take, how long they could stand without falling. And so they stood watching the stars, waiting for the final fire to come. Final trial. The chamber for the final trial was unlike anything before. It was not cold, not silent. Instead, it was warm and full of color. Soft music played from unseen corners. The air smelled like memory and peace. It was built to confuse, to relax, to make the heart slow down and forget that it had entered a test at all. At the center of this chamber stood a large platform, split into two paths, one red, one white, both smooth, both calm. At the end of each path sat a small device, simple in shape. No lights, no sound, no movement, just still metal waiting. The council explained nothing. They only said, "This is the final phase. You must choose your path and complete the test alone." Nothing more was spoken. Nothing more was needed. First species to enter the chamber walked with steady steps, eyes forward, mind focused. They stopped at the crossroads, stared at both paths, then began to feel the weight of choice. They were not told which path was right, or what the device would do, or what the test really meant. The confusion began to grow like a shadow. One took the red path, placed their hand on the device, and in a flash they vanished, removed from the chamber, not dead, not hurt, but removed from the trial. They failed not because they chose wrong, but because they chose without knowing what they gave away. Another took the white path, reached the device, and was shown a vision of another being, one from their own kind, trapped in danger. The choice was clear: activate the device and save the other, or walk away and keep their own place in the trial. Some hesitated, some saved the other and vanished from the test. Some ignored the vision and continued forward, but their scores dropped, and the council made quiet notes. The trial was not about strength or mind, it was about sacrifice. It was about seeing beyond the self, choosing others over victory, choosing pain over reward, even when no one would see it. even when no one would know, species began to fall, not because they were weak, but because they chose comfort, because they chose to win alone instead of lose together. Then the Deathworlders stepped forward. They did not pause at the doorway, did not ask what the test meant. They saw the paths and walked one by one, without fear, without rush, without doubt. Each of them chose a different path, not because they planned it, but because they trusted their own steps. One reached the red path and placed their hand on the device. A vision appeared, not of another human, but of an alien child crying behind glass. The voice said, "Save them and leave the trial, or move on and forget the choice." Humans stared at the child, then at the path ahead, and said, "I would rather lose than walk away." They pressed the button and vanished from the trial. Another human walked the white path, faced the same choice, but the vision showed an old enemy, not a friend, not a child, but one who had once tried to harm their people. Still the human did not blink, reached forward and said, "No one deserves to be left behind." They, too, vanished. The council watched each choice, watched the humans give up their place in the trial without anger, without regret, and still something strange began to happen. Each time a human vanished, another message appeared on the device. "The test has been completed. Your truth is recorded. Return to the hall." One by one the humans returned, not to the start, not to the platform, but to the council itself, not as competitors, but as something else, something rare, something difficult to explain. They did not complete the trial by winning, they completed it by choosing to lose for the right reason. They showed that survival was not just about strength or thought or endurance. It was about the soul, the quiet part that chose kindness, even when no one would reward it. Only 5 species remained when the trial ended, and only the Deathworlders passed every test, without breaking, without falling, without forgetting who they were. The council called for silence across the galaxy. Records, updated messages sent, histories rewritten. The final result announced before all systems. The winners of the endurance protocol, the beings who endured mind, fear, silence, and choice, were the ones who came from the burning world, the violent sky, the crashing sea, the beings called Deathworlders. No applause was given, no cheers, no celebration, only quiet respect, the kind that lasts longer than words. When asked later why they made those choices, why they gave up victory for strangers, one of the humans replied, "We didn't come to win, we came to show who we are, even when no one is looking." That sentence was etched into the wall of the council chamber, not in gold or light, but in stone, carved deep so it could not be erased. The Deathworlders stood together, not proud, not loud, just present. They did not thank the council, they did not demand reward, they simply waited for the last word, the final step. And the council gave it, not with fear, not with shame, but with a kind of wonder, the kind that comes when something small survives everything and still remains true. The challenge was over, but the galaxy had changed, and the ones who changed it, the ones who no one believed in, no one trusted, no one wanted, had become the example for all to follow. The aftermath. The trials had ended. The lights of the last chamber faded into the walls. The crowd that had once filled the viewing domes began to leave, but no voice rose, no sound of feet echoed. Only a strange stillness remained, as if the stars themselves had paused to listen one last time. Inside the central hall, the Deathworlders stood without movement, their suits still marked from earlier trials, dust still resting on their boots, their hands relaxed by their sides. They did not smile, did not raise their heads. They waited for what would follow. The council returned to the high platform, their forms shining in the glow of the pillar lights, eyes made of crystal, wings made of light, scales made of memory, and all of them fixed on the humans with a gaze not of judgment, but something deeper. Lead speaker stepped forward, his voice steady but quiet, the kind of voice that had spoken laws, written systems, decided peace and war. For thousands of years, his words rose through the chamber, slow and clear. The endurance protocol has been passed, not in power, not in brilliance, not in design, but in something else, in will, in mercy, in truth. This outcome was not expected, not planned, not predicted, yet it cannot be denied. The other species that stood nearby bowed their heads, some in respect, others in shame. Many had believed they were greater because they had machines that could move stars, because they had lived longer, because their cities reached moons and black holes. But none of it had carried them through the trial. Only the Deathworlders. Planet had been marked as unsuitable for centuries, their history filled with war storms, sickness, hunger, yet from that same world came beings who did not run from pain, who did not fear silence, who did not break under fire, and who gave up victory to save others. Council declared the result with no ceremony, with no performance, just a truth spoken into the open air. The Deathworlders have completed all stages with integrity. The protocol recognizes them as the dominant survivors of this cycle. A symbol appeared above them, not made of metal or light, but of living thought shaped by the Council and gifted to them. It could not be touched or copied. It would follow them wherever they went, and all who saw it would know its meaning. Still, the humans did not move. They nodded once slowly, then turned toward the exit, not asking for titles, not claiming leadership, not seeking reward. They came to face the test, and now it was done outside the hall. The galaxy had already changed. Messages flew across space, data shared from planet to planet. Voices spoke the name of Earth, not with doubt, but with wonder. Young species listened to the story of the trial. Schools added it to lessons. Poets began to write not about glory, but about endurance, about standing when others fall, about giving when others take. A small ship waited for the Deathworlders, its engines old, its frame worn, nothing shiny, nothing sleek, just a tool made to carry people through cold and time. They stepped into it with the same quiet steps they had taken through the trial. They sat without words. The doors closed, and the stars began to shift inside the ship. One of them looked out at the stars and spoke to the others, not loud, not soft, just calm. They did not expect us to pass. They never thought we could last, but we did not come to prove we were better. We came because we wanted to know who we really are. Another one nodded, leaned back, closed his eyes, and said, "They will remember this, not because we won, but because we chose the harder path." Silence filled the ship again, but this silence was not heavy, not sharp. It was the silence of something completed, of something true. Back on the central moon, the Council held a final meeting, not to judge, not to question, but to reflect. They looked at the data, at the moments recorded, at the steps taken. They saw how each human chose to suffer when comfort was near, chose to give when taking was easy, chose to stay true when pretending would have been safer. Council had seen many trials across the ages, but none like this. The Deathworlders had not just survived, they had transformed. The meaning of the protocol, what once measured strength, now revealed soul. What once rewarded winners now honored the ones who gave everything without demand. From that day forward, the trial would carry their mark, and those who came in the next cycle would not only prepare their minds and bodies, but also their hearts. The story of the Deathworlders would be told not as a tale of power, but as a story of choice. Not as a legend of heroes, but as a reminder of what survival truly means. Some species began to reach out to Earth, not to rule, not to control, but to learn, not about weapons, not about machines, but about spirit, about how to stay calm in fire, about how to find light in darkness, about how to walk through storms and still choose kindness. Earth received those messages with surprise, with curiosity, but not with pride. They replied with honesty, shared what they knew, shared what they remembered. They said, "We do not have all the answers, we only have what we lived and what we learned." The galaxy shifted slowly, quietly, but deeply, and at the center of that shift stood the people who had once been ignored, once been feared, once been called too wild, too weak, too broken, but no longer. They were now the standard, the mirror, the story that would not fade. The challenge had been faced, and only one species had survived, not with force, not with perfection, but with something older, something harder, something simple. The choice to keep walking when the path breaks, the choice to help others even when no one sees, the choice to remain human, even when the stars forget what that means. In the end, the galaxy remembered. The Deathworlders did not just survive, they endured the end.